And good morning and welcome to the U.S. News and World Report's Leadership in Education Breakfast. I'm Marion Phillips III, our Senior Vice President for Community Development and DEI. First, let me thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to share in an important conversation with education leaders who are diligently working to educate students of all ages, backgrounds, and communities. An extra thank you to our speakers, Dr. Mildred Garcia, who traveled the furthest. Thank you very much. Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman, who had the shortest commute. Thank you very much. And to Chancellor King, who came all the way from Brooklyn. Thank you very much. And to Undersecretary Kaval, we appreciate you making your way up from Washington yesterday. Thank you, and to your team for making the arrangements. A special thank you to Wendy Solomon and the Harris Poll, a longtime partner of U.S. News and World Report, and to our sponsor, Dr. Jonathan Capel and the Montclair State University. Go Hawks! Throughout our 90-year history, we've always endeavored to provide our readership with useful fact-finding, fact-based, and unbiased information, offering the context needed to delve deeply into various issues. Among the many ways we inform the public and discuss solutions is by hosting leaders to engage in important subject matters like economic mobility, education, environmental justice, and healthcare. And since the height of COVID-19 pandemic, we have restarted our in-person thought leader events. Our last event was the State of Equity in America in November of 2022. We are already planning to repeat that event in June of next year. We are also planning 2 other events for next year, including Leaders in Healthcare and Leadership in America, a spotlight on leaders of today. Today we are recording this event and we'll post it on our U.S. News site where we have over 450 million viewers. Now it is my pleasure to invite our Executive Chairman and CEO to the stage and share more about today's events. Eric Gertler, please.
Thank you, Marion, and good morning, everybody. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to have all of you here to discuss an important subject. Now, when we decided many months ago to focus on the topic of leadership, we did so with the modest goal of convening leaders in higher education to come together and share learnings with one another. We have had sufficient interactions with the academic world over the years to understand that the role of a university president, even in the best of times, requires a delicate balance of managing competing constituencies while setting a clear vision for one's academic institution. The ability to balance educating students, hiring faculty, managing administrators, reporting to trustees, raising money from donors, all aligned in some general direction, is truly a careful juggling act. We also know that this work has been undertaken in an increasingly difficult environment where we are seeing declining levels of trust in academic institutions. But to be fair, we've seen declining levels of trust in many institutions across the country. And we're also seeing declining enrollment numbers where high school students are increasingly electing not to go to college. Of course, complicating all of this, these last 2 months have made one's role as the president of a university, the leader of the academic institution, infinitely more difficult. Some leaders have been able to demonstrate the requisite moral leadership and compassion while at the same time inculcating the right values to the students and their campuses, all the while respecting the values of the First Amendment. Others have not met those standards. In some ways, this sensitive balancing of morals and values has occurred before. If you think about the civil rights movement, Vietnam War protests, and even the women's rights rallies. Leadership has never been easy, especially in times of crisis. But it is what we expect and demand from those in positions of leadership today. Now, U.S. News and the Harris Poll commissioned a survey on leadership in higher education. We did so over the weekend, and I want to share some results with you because these are the most up-to-date results on what Americans are experiencing with respect to higher education leaders. So here, as you can see, Americans are experiencing a crisis of faith toward higher education leaders, and as you see, 58% of Americans believe that university leaders are failing students today rather than developing them at 42%. And even 53% of current Gen Z and millennials students think they are failing as well. Next slide. Americans, now again, only 43% of Americans believe that universities are succeeding in developing the leaders of tomorrow. Gen Z and millennials have the same feeling, slightly more. 45% of millennials believe that universities are successful in developing the leaders of tomorrow. And here, we see that 56% of Americans think that university leaders are not good examples of leaders for their students. If we continue, Americans don't fully trust university leaders to prioritize their students. Only 45% of Americans trust university leaders to do the right thing for their students. Gen Z and millennials are more optimistic. 57% of millennials do trust their university leaders to do the right thing for their students. Now, when we think about comparing public universities, private universities, and Ivy League colleges, we see that 59% of Americans trust public university leaders to prioritize their students, 55% when it comes to private universities, but only 51% of Americans trust Ivy League university leaders to prioritize their students. And just some other data that we didn't put up in slides. 4 in 5 Americans, so 79%, believe that higher education institutions are too worried about their endowment than creating leaders of tomorrow. So almost 80%. 63% think university leaders are prioritizing external shareholders. And then just the last statistic, when we think about the leaders of tomorrow, 78%, so almost 4 in 5, think that if higher education doesn't become more accessible to all people, we'll continue to produce the same leaders of tomorrow. So interesting statistics. These are all fresh off the press, so to speak. We received them yesterday. So we'll be, in conjunction with Harris Poll, we'll be releasing those later today. This morning, we aim to share the learnings of leadership from a group of some of the most respected thinkers and leaders in academia. And for that, we are truly privileged to be having those conversations at this time in the education cycle. Okay, a brief word about our education rankings. I'm sure many of you are hoping that I would not mention them, but on a very serious note, and I think as many of you know, our education rankings this year incorporated a greater emphasis on outcome measurements and also on graduating students with manageable debt. Now, the increased weighting of these factors in our rankings are a reflection of the conversations that we've had with many in the academic world and some of you in this room. And I just want to thank you for helping us to continue to raise the bar of what we do. I can assure you that we, like everyone else in the room, care deeply about students and the decisions that they make. The rankings are but a small part of the journalism that we produce to have a positive impact on students and higher education. So now let's get to the program. We truly have a great group of academic leaders. Unfortunately, some last-minute changes. John Gerzema, the CEO of Harris Poll, got the flu. So I will be moderating the conversation with Undersecretary of Education James Kowal and Chancellor John King of the State University of New York. And Wendy Solomon will discuss the latest survey of what Americans want in their leaders today. And I just also want to thank Montclair State University for their support. So with that, let's bring Wendy on. She'll arrive on Zoom. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to share what we learned in our partnership with U.S. News about the evolution of leadership and what we're seeing about the context for leadership. And I think one thing that really is essential as we think about leading, we lead against a context. And at the Harris Poll, we've had the privilege of measuring society and sort of this unique position that we're in, this set of what we're calling a perma-crisis, these stacked crises. So as we think about our students, as we think about our colleagues, as we think about the people that we sit across at the dinner table, we are at a point where we are worried about the economy, we are worried about our health, we are worried about global crises, and we just can't seem to escape them. This is a very long trend line and it could go back further. So we're at a very unique backdrop for leadership. We also know through our collaboration with the American Psychological Association, we do the Stress in America study, that Americans feel this stress. We sometimes feel so much stress that we can't function, but sometimes we feel stressed, but we know that others have it harder, so we aren't sure exactly what to do with it. Importantly, I think for this conversation is that we don't really feel like we have a safety net. We don't feel supported by our leaders. We feel the country is on the wrong path. We feel that as we look ahead to future generations, the majority aren't sure whether or not our children will inherit a better world than we did. So a unique time for us to lead. And as we look across at sort of the future, right? And we say, and this was a study we did in a dozen different countries, so this isn't US only. And we say, look ahead to 2025. Let's envision what's going to get better and what's going to get worse. And the global public, the majority of them, particularly when it comes to climate change and the environment, particularly when it comes to financial inequity, which the public around the world is anticipating, fast forward a dozen years, and it's going to be worse. The only part of this, not government leadership, not well-being, not even business leadership, social justice, equity at work is the one area where people feel that things may be getting better, but still more on the split fence. So the notion is the public around the world does not feel that we have the tools to handle the stacked crisis in which we're in. So we look to leaders and we say, and we are unable to find sort of a soft landing there. There is cynicism and not a lot of comfort taken. So we have nearly 9 in 10, 87% say there's just a crisis today in the government, in corporate America. The vast majority indicate that they're disappointed by leaders in society and that it's going to take some kind of overhaul. It's going to take something seismic. If I had to sort of tee up what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, there's many people that think, well, maybe leaders should look a little different than they do right now. They should act a little different. And so we'll talk about some of those things. But this isn't benign because right now, 3/4 of Americans say that these leaders are actually preventing society from progressing. So the question is, what's needed? So we undertook a survey that actually used a forced choice, like a paired choice comparison. So what that means is it helps us really draw distinctions between what Americans are looking for in leaders that's most critical. So we gave them 30 different things that one could be, right? Words that we could use to describe leaders. And we said, what is the most important thing? And so what we're hearing is that against this difficult crisis, we're looking for the basics. We want trustworthy, we want honest, and we want hardworking. Things like vulnerable and curious and agile. Although some of these are tools that leaders may find important to navigate the changing sands, what the public wants are the basics. And what's really important as somebody who looks at a lot of polls, you can find both sides of the aisle, any generation, right? This is a universal call for leaders. We want hardworking, honest, and trustworthy leaders. The problem is that when we look particularly in our political leadership sphere, most Americans say those traits aren't existing today, right? 3/4 say most leaders in politics aren't honest. Nearly a similar number, I don't trust them. I don't think they're hardworking, right? So, and this is true on both sides of the aisle. Sometimes with different degrees of intensity, but for the most part, both sides of the aisle. So trustworthiness may be old-fashioned, but the majority of Americans are saying it's really important in our leaders. So I think a really provocative piece of the work actually had to do with what we're learning about what leadership looks like. So it's not only about what one says, but about actually who the leaders are. Are the leaders today, when Americans look up, are they actually seen as a group that's suited to handle the crisis and the stacked nature of our challenges? Or do we need new skill sets? Many Americans feel that we have to go past just what we have traditionally seen and thought of as a leader. Because fundamentally, Americans question, the majority of Americans question whether that current leadership tier is prepared to respond to the new crises of today. So diversity matters. Diversity matters. It doesn't matter government or business. And Americans believe, nearly 8 in 10 Americans believe that a more diverse leadership bench and tier would result in better outcomes, be it for business, be it for government. The value proposition of diversity is there in every context. So when we look at, however, what Americans say, we believe that political leadership needs to be more diverse to represent the entirety of who we are, to successfully respond to the new crises. This diversity brings the ideas and the different angles and the new tool sets required in government and in business. There isn't enough diversity in corporate America today. That is commonly believed by 2/3 of Americans, and that DEI needs to be more of a focus. We need to take more time and prioritize that within our businesses, an opinion held by the majority, regardless, again, of whether one self-identifies as Democrat or Republican. And we know that, when we talk to workers, and so these are among surveys of employed Americans, and we say there's not enough diversity in their company today. And particularly when we talk to when we talk to workers of color, we hear that particularly loud. There's concern that there are people within organizations that are overlooked because of their identities. And importantly, what I think is as we think about what we aspire to be, as we think about what a worker wants to be at their company, people look up and don't see anybody they aspire to be, right? I don't see myself there. I don't aspire to progress there. And that's particularly loud, again, for Gen Z, for the youth among us, and for people of color. And so there's a very strong sentiment that although this should be true in business, Americans are very clearly recognizing that it's not, the diversity does not exist. But also when we think about who's in that chair of leadership, we want to think about youth, because what we're finding in our data is that what the youth bring, there's a strong sentiment in America that young leaders are what it's going to take to respond to these crises of today. By the way, they also don't think there's enough of them. We also know that young business leaders have to move over. And I think this is a really provocative part of what we're learning, right? So holding on to the status quo, passing the torch to the next generation, Americans are seeing that there's a long-term harm to companies and to businesses when we don't plan for those transitions and open our leadership tier up to younger leaders and the points of view that they bring. So I think what's interesting here, though, is how Gen Z is sort of facing this and reacting to the context against which they are. This is part of the be the change you want to see in the world, right? Because what we're seeing here among Gen Z Americans in particular is that they are taking the reins and saying, okay, I'm going to work to be the leader that they wish they had. Again, these people, as they look up the organization, they look at their political leaders, they don't perhaps see themselves, or they don't see their values, that they are taking action to create the change. they're not going to sit on the sidelines. They are both informed in what is happening, and they're sort of walking that talk, and they are getting more involved and active in politics. There is a call from the majority of Americans that society won't progress if we don't take these young leaders seriously. This is not the kids' table, right? This is a call from Americans to say this point of view is valid, and this generation, as we see in our data from Gen Z, is diving in. And why are they diving in? They are motivated by their most basic concerns. When we look at youth in America, and we do this through a lot of partnerships we have, not just with the APA, but with some of our other clients here where we do work with, and we understand the fundamental things that make us feel safe and secure, that help us look ahead and trust in our tomorrow, are not always present for this generation. Where the level of mental health challenges that we're almost 9 in 10 in Gen Z say they're struggling. They are creating alternate plans because maybe due to climate change, maybe due to geopolitical strife, they're not sure if their community will remain safe in their future. Just think about that. 82% think that literally the decisions they make have to do with whether the environment can tolerate sort of, that will close off some options to them. They are dreaming about climate change. So our most fundamental, the basis of our security, we're seeing rocked among Gen Z. And so they are becoming that change, not just in terms of physiological security, but when we think about their economic confidence, am I starting from a point where I can achieve what my parents achieved, where I can achieve that American dream? We see a lot of skepticism here. It's moving further away from them. The systems aren't really working in their favor. Simply put, and this was a big conversation at my Thanksgiving table with my Gen Z guests, they feel further behind and they don't see a path to catching up to achieve that down the road American dream. So the American dream is elusive among this group. And so against this difficult state of society, against not quite trusting political leaders, they're looking outside the political establishment. Again, it's not benign. What we're seeing is that they believe these political leaders are actually worsening society, right? So it's not just like we're not moving forward, we're not making progress, we're actually bringing about the opposite. And so what they're doing is they're diving in, because their sentiment, 70% of Americans say that political leaders really care about their own power and influence, right? It's not about the rest. So we're seeing them taking action. They are clear that the systems need to change. We see them engaging in policy. This year, Gen Z is going to surpass boomers in the workforce. That is going to bring about a big cultural shift. And they're saying, I don't think that we have to play by the same rules, right? More so than boomers have ever said that. They're saying older generations are refusing to step out of the way for younger leaders. Boomers don't see that as well. But there is a shift in the works. There is a key role for higher education. When Gen Z, who are graduates, say, what did that higher education experience do? They indicate that they wouldn't be the leaders they are today without that experience. That they looked up in higher education, and that is where they got the experience that taught them that they didn't have to be on the sidelines, that they can actually be and bring about that, be that agent of change. And that there's very much the belief among Americans in general that this is a fundamental role for higher education in preparing the leaders for tomorrow. And then as was teed off before I got on, there's also some concerns, right? So are we focused on endowments too much, right? Is higher education, and these are what the opinions of some students, or are we focused enough on creating the leaders of tomorrow? Are we focused on developing students? Are we focused on providing and living that example of leadership for students as well? And you see sort of mixed sentiment on that. So room to improve in this critical backdrop for leadership creation. So trusting universities to do the right things for students is obviously the seedbed for a lot of this. So we see that this is a difficult time. There's a lack of confidence in leadership. We're looking for trust. We're looking for honesty. We're looking for being hardworking, and that there's a clear role to play. in higher education. So thank you so much.
Wow, those are pretty stark and concerning statistics, ominous for the future and for the development of leaders. And with that, it is my pleasure to call to the stage John King Jr. and James Cavall, two highly respected leaders in the education world. Now, these are two leaders that in the education world that really need no introduction. But in the last 2 weeks, I was reading a story about Henry Kissinger. And at an event, the speaker said, "It's now my pleasure to present Henry Kissinger, who needs no introduction." And Henry Kissinger came to the stage and he said, "Yes, it's true. I need no introduction. But I like a good introduction." So with that, John King, who's the 15th Chancellor of the State University of New York, former President and CEO of Education Trust, which is a national civil rights nonprofit to identify opportunities and efforts to close the gap in education, and the 10th U.S. Secretary of Education. So thank you for joining us. Have a round of applause. And of course, James Cavall, who's the current Undersecretary of Education, who's got a long track record of public service. He was a policy advisor under President Clinton. He was also a special assistant for economic policy and deputy undersecretary of education under President Obama, and also a former president of the Institute for College Access and Success, which serves to hold colleges accountable and to help make sure that students graduate with manageable debt. So thank you as well. Round of applause, please. So let's get started in following up on we see that there's a crisis of leadership. And perhaps, Chancellor King, you can share with us your guiding principles to leadership. And when you think about the way forward for leadership, what is your North Star that you think about?
Yeah. First, thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's great to see many old friends in the room. Look, what's always been my North Star for education was really my own experience in school here in New York City and Brooklyn. Both my parents were New York City public school educators. Both passed away when I was little. My mom when I was 8, my dad when I was 12. In the period when it was just my dad and me, my dad was struggling with Alzheimer's. Home was incredibly unstable and scary and difficult. And the only reason I'm sitting here today, the only reason I'm alive today, the only reason I've been able to achieve the things I have in my life is because of teachers at PS 276 in Canarsie and Mark Twain Junior High School in Coney Island. Those teachers saved my life, quite literally. And so to me, that's what drives me as an education leader to say, how can our institutions provide those transformative, life-saving experiences for all of our students? And one of the things I'm really proud of about SUNY is we're doing the thing public higher education was meant to do, serving low-income students, first-gen students, veterans, the single mom who's struggling to get ahead at work, just trying to figure out how to get a little more skills so she can move up in the workplace and bring home more money for her family. That's what we're supposed to be doing, and that's what we're laser focused on every day.
Right, thank you. Undersecretary, what guides you when you think about leadership?
Well, one of the real privileges of my career has been the opportunity to work with a number of very accomplished people in different fields. John certainly one of them. And I've tried to, think about what made them successful as leaders. And I was comparing my list of characteristics with the polling results, which is some overlap, but not all the same. I do think it is important to be authentic. And I think we have this idea, this cultural idea of a leader, almost like a military general who gives orders and gives speeches. And really, there's all kinds of leaders. There are a lot of effective leaders who are introverts, who are very emotionally attuned. So you need to be clear about what you care about and lead and connect with people in a way that's authentic to you. Not on their list, but things that are lower on their list. Humility. I think it's important to understand that you have something to learn in new contexts. You have something to learn from the people around you. And I don't think I've worked with a leader who didn't, in some respect, need this help of other people. All of us have blind spots or areas where we're not that good. And we need to have the self-awareness to recognize that and let people help us. And then the third, which wasn't mentioned at all, but I think is really important, is a sense of clarity. Are you able to identify what the goal is, and can you communicate that in a way that inspires people, and do it in a way that's very concise and very moving and that connects with people?
Right, thank you. So let's talk about leadership today. We saw some stark numbers. We know that in today we're seeing enrollments declining. We're seeing declining trust in academic institutions. We all saw in Congress last week lots of blowback from those hearings. My question to you, and Undersecretary, I'll start with you. What type of leadership is needed today in higher education?
Well, clearly it's a challenging situation. I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that calls for violence against any group on the basis of religion or national origin is wrong and needs to be condemned. And when we're talking about calls for violence against Jews or Israelis, because of the history there, that is particularly dangerous. So we can't forget that. And of course, free speech, free inquiry is a core value of higher education. But we have a fundamental responsibility to keep our students safe. And we need to make sure that we're accomplishing that responsibility.
Chancellor King, how do you think about your job today and the leadership that you have to provide in these times?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything James said. I think this is a moment for moral courage and moral clarity. Moral courage in condemning anti-Semitism and taking on issues of anti-Semitism on campus. Moral courage in responding to the Supreme Court's very problematic decision about race-conscious admissions and saying we are not going to abandon our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Instead, we're going to find new ways to ensure that our student body, our faculty, our leadership are diverse. Maureen McGinnis is here from Stony Brook. Stony Brook, amongst the AAU universities, is near the top of the distribution for things like how many Pell-eligible students they serve, how many first-gen students they serve. They moved up in the U.S. News & World Report rankings, if one pays attention to those things. Precisely because of the changes in metrics that increase the value of serving low-income students, being an engine of social mobility. So we need moral courage there. We need moral courage on climate. I was struck by how much students in Gen Z in particular, my own girls included, think intensely about the challenges that climate change presents and are looking to leaders to step up and say, we're not just going to lament the problem, we're going to do something to move our campus to net zero. We're going to lead. Maury at Stony Brook, for example, is going to build a $700 million climate campus on Governor's Island to help be a model for the country and the world around how we think about issues of climate resilience. So that's the kind of moral courage that we need in this moment. We have to show that higher ed is willing to take on the biggest challenges that face our society.
Great. Undersecretary, part of your role is policy. Chancellor, you played a very big role in policy. Are there policies today that we need to implement, that policymakers should take? Should Congress be taking an increased role today in trying to achieve the sort of goals that you're talking about? Chancellor, do you want to go first?
Yeah, there's a long list of things Congress should be doing. They seem to struggle with the doing part, but look, I will give credit where credit's due. I was with Senator Schumer yesterday, who led on the CHIPS Act, which is a really important step for the country to make sure that we are positioned to be competitive in the semiconductor industry. He led on the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a really important step to make sure we are building the renewable energy infrastructure we need. So I do want to give credit. That said, on higher ed issues, we've been waiting for the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act for a long time. Probably the thing that I would say I'd be most eager to see them do is to take on the Pell Grant program and update it. In 1980, Pell Grants accounted for roughly 80% of the cost of public higher education. Today, it's about 28%. What we've done as a country is we've shifted from thinking about public higher ed as a public good to moving to a system that depends on students and their families paying and doing a lot of borrowing. And James doing extraordinary work to try to tackle the crisis of student debt. But we have to hold Congress accountable for not ensuring the purchasing power of the Pell Grant. So if Congress could do one thing, I'd say double the Pell Grant tomorrow.
So I have to say, I think the work that's being done on CHIPS Upstate is fantastic, and lots of congratulations to Senator Schumer. I have to also acknowledge Hope Knight and my former agency, Empire State Development, for all of their great work too. So thank you. Undersecretary, why don't you talk about some of the important initiatives that you're undertaking right now that Chancellor King just talked about?
Yeah, well, of course, agree wholeheartedly with John on doubling the Pell Grant. The president has a great idea for a new federal-state partnership that would require congressional action. I haven't found a lot of interest among members of Congress about what I think they should be doing. So I do spend more time focusing on my day job and the authority that we have. And we've been working really hard on the student debt problem. And debt has grown substantially in recent decades. More students are borrowing, they're borrowing more. The assumption made by all of this is that students are getting an economic ROI from higher education that makes this a good investment in their futures. That is true in many cases. For me, repaying my loans wasn't fun, but it was a small price to pay for my education. But we know there are a lot of people who are struggling. 1 in 3 borrowers don't graduate. A lot of people are taking out heavy loans to pursue fields that are not intended to be high-paying. We see troubling racial disparities. So we need to think about, are we financing higher education in a way that is consistent with our mission and our ideals? We're working really hard to make student loans more affordable. We've identified 3.6 million people who were eligible for loan forgiveness but hadn't otherwise received it. We've created the most affordable repayment plan ever, the SAVE plan, where if you're earning less than about $15 an hour or more if you have a family, no payments are due. And we're looking to identify where is all this unaffordable debt coming from. It is still the case that a disproportionate amount of it is coming from for-profit colleges. We've just completed strongest rules ever around outcomes at for-profit and career programs. But they're not the only sources of unaffordable debt. And I think we do need to think carefully and look at the data and not rely on our assumptions about what a college degree is worth.
So I think that's very important work. We're seeing in the work that we do over and over again, students questioning the value of a college education. We don't want that. So I think the work that you're doing to make sure that kids are graduating with manageable debt, have accessibility. Are you worried that high school students will look at other pathways instead of college? How do we, should we be looking at other alternatives, or is still the focus ensuring that they're getting the best value of their college education, Chancellor?
The way I think about it is there are very limited opportunities for students who enter this 21st century economy with just a high school diploma. So you're going to need some type of post-secondary training or credential. Now at SUNY, because we have the range of institutions, we have 30 community colleges, we have R1 universities, we have the full range, there is a place for every New Yorker at SUNY. That may be that they decide to do the one-year certificate program at Onondaga Community College that prepares them for a great job at Micron. That's coming to the Syracuse region, fantastic. But that also may be that they decide to pursue an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, graduate programs. The evidence is you earn $1 million more over your lifetime if you have a bachelor's degree. So I think we've got to do more to make the case to young people about why post-secondary education can unlock economic opportunity for them. And if we're honest, as a sector, we've got to get better at helping students see those connections while they're with us. One of my goals is I would love to get to a point where every SUNY undergraduate has an internship experience. And not just the engineering student. I want the sociology student, the English student to have that internship experience. So they're thinking about work and what work will be like. And maybe the internship is terrible and you decide you never want to work at that place, but that's a learning experience too. You know, I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old. It's weird to say, 20-year-old. And my 20-year-old is studying acting. She just was in The Tempest this weekend. It was amazing. I'm super excited for her. I'm really glad she's having a rich undergraduate experience exposed to the liberal arts. It's wonderful. And I really want to make sure she gets a good job and does not end up living in my basement, right? That is, right? And when you survey parents across the country, they do expect that higher education is going to be a bridge to a good job. There's work we could do to make that a better reality for students.
And I think that reflects the data that we've seen about how higher education is becoming less accessible. So let's talk about inclusivity. Both of you have considerable experience, both in terms of your public work, also in terms of your work with the Education Trust, Institute for College Access and Success. Can you talk about some of the important lessons that you've learned that have worked in terms of making our education facilities more inclusive? Undersecretary, maybe you go first.
Yeah, so I really appreciate the opportunity to be on some of the campuses that are really leading this work. I was recently at Gutman. Haven't been invited to SUNY yet.
Anytime, anytime.
And to every campus.
Exactly. I did all 64 from January to May. You're welcome to join me.
I think we're really at an incredible moment in higher education because 15 or 20 years ago, there was still a pretty heavy kind of look to your left, look to your right. One of these people isn't going to make it. Maybe that's a good thing. Failure rates is a sign of rigor. And I think we're shifting toward believing that all students can master college level work and that we as educators have a responsibility to help them. And there's more and more evidence. You know, 15 years ago we had CUNY ASAP doubling graduation rates. People said, oh, it's too expensive. And then you had Georgia State growing to produce more black BAs than any other institution. And say, oh, well, you have a couple of exceptional leaders there. Now you have Cal State and Dr. Garcia, you know, raising their statewide graduation rate by 6 percentage points. That's tens of thousands of lives a year that have improved thanks to those initiatives. And so it's taking the excuses away from why we can't help more of our students graduate and go on to a better life. You know, I will just say quickly, like the things that I have seen that seem to be common elements. One is a culture change around taking responsibility over student success and not thinking of higher ed as a cafeteria, and if you're college material, you'll figure it out. Using data, trying to figure out what are the bumps in the process, and then just chipping away at them. There's not a silver bullet, but just figuring out where are students getting stuck. And third is trying to create a culture of belonging. And like I'm a little more of a data guy, so I was a little slow to understand this. But whether it is faculty or dedicated staff or peer groups, you know, it's so important for students to connect on campus and to believe that people like them can succeed on campus.
Chancellor?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with everything James said, and I would add, I think one of the keys to accessibility is lowering friction, right, and making it easier for people to find their path. There's a colleague here from Jobs for the Future, does a lot of work around dual enrollment. I think there's a lot of good evidence that high quality dual enrollment helps high school students see themselves as college students and get started on college credits. One of the things we're doing to lower friction, we sent a letter home to every student in New York State outside of New York City last year, every high school senior, saying there's a place for you at SUNY. And it's, dear Aaron, there's a place for you at your local community college. It's always been true that our community colleges are open access institutions, but students don't always see themselves, especially first-gen students, as college students. And so when you say there's a place for you, scan on this QR code and pick your program, right? It's just reducing that friction. We started an initiative last year. If you apply to one of our more selective campuses, you don't get in, we reach out to you from one of our other campuses and say, there's a place for you here. You didn't get in there, but we have a program that'll be great for you. We started something called Transfer Match, where we're reaching out to community college students before they complete and saying, you haven't applied to a four-year, but we want you to know there's a place for you at multiple four-year institutions. Here are the institutions you could choose. And one of the things I'm trying to persuade the governor and legislature to do is to have a universal FAFSA completion requirement. Last year, New York students left $200 million on the table in unclaimed federal aid. If they knew that money was there, that would reduce friction. They'd be more likely to choose college. Or think about the student who doesn't do the FAFSA, but is going and paying or borrowing. And it's so hard. We can make it a little easier if they completed the FAFSA and got access to that federal aid. And ultimately, programs like ASAP, which we're scaling thanks to Governor Hochul's help across 25 of our campuses, programs like ASAP are about making the college experience just have less friction, better advising, wraparound supports, just-in-time financial assistance, just those little bits of help at the right moment that make it a little bit easier.
Lots of different programs, ideas. If you fast forward 5 years, where would you like to see that greatest change? How would you think about that?
Look, I'd love to see us serving more students. There's sometimes people say, oh, well, we're facing this demographic cliff. And I say there are plenty of students to go around. If we increase the percentage of students who at the end of high school choose college, plenty of students. If we reach out to those young folks who are between 18, 24, they're not in school, they don't really have a plan, we need them to come to higher ed, plenty of students. If we reach out to the folks over 25 and over who are working, want to move ahead at work, maybe have some credits and no degree and get them back, plenty of students. So I hope that we grow enrollment, not just at SUNY, but in the higher ed sector generally, because I think that'd be good for the economy. And then we've got to continue to improve completion, right? And close those completion gaps for Black students, for Latino students, for low-income students. That's all achievable. We have great examples around the country of folks doing those things. We just have to scale them.
Yeah, I think the statistic is 60% of Black and brown students after 6 years fail to graduate, mostly because of financial issues. Undersecretary, if you look down 5 years, what would you like to see as the biggest change or improvement as you look across our higher education system?
Yeah, I think we do need to rethink how we finance higher education and invest in creating the opportunities we want our young people to have, and recognize that we all have a stake in having more college graduates. It's stronger families, stronger communities, a stronger economy, and that's worth investing in. And I would like to see us, embrace higher ed's potential for moving people out of poverty, for promoting greater equity, for promoting future prosperity. And that means, as John said, embracing the mission of serving everyone in our communities and doing what it takes to help them graduate and go on to a career and a better life.
Thank you. Chancellor, you started off talking about semiconductor chips in upstate New York, and I certainly know from my work, part of the success of doing that was partnering with the state universities, making sure that we were graduating students with the right skills. A great example of a public-private partnership. As you look down the road, is that a healthy thing for education? Should we be worried about business being too involved in higher education? How do you think about that?
Look, I'm very excited about public-private partnerships. We want to double research across the SUNY system because we know that's going to help drive economic development. The semiconductor story in New York, as you know well, Eric, and as Hope knows, is a story of a 20-year investment in research facilities. Albany Nanotech, which is arguably the world's best semiconductor research facility. Senator Schumer would say it's inarguable that it is the best research facility in the world. And then over a 20-year period, growing that partnership and being able to say to a company like Micron, we have the research facility, we have the workforce from the technician to the PhD engineer come to New York, and now Micron is going to bring 10,000 jobs at Micron and 50,000 jobs between Micron and the supply chain companies to the Syracuse region. That's a great story. We want to replicate that story. Binghamton University is competing for what would be an over $100 million NSF grant in battery technology. If they are able to make a big bet on battery technology, that could be a source of jobs in the southern tier that would be extraordinary. Stony Brook and Farmingdale are working on a project around offshore wind and training folks for offshore wind. So those partnerships with employers are really important. The thing that I would say is I need the employers also making the case for doubling Pell, right? I need them also to make the case for state and federal investment in public higher education. We can deliver the workforce. We need their partnership on multiple levels.
Right. Undersecretary, you mentioned earlier you're a data guy. I'm a data guy. We've had some good conversation about data collection, the importance of data. Can you share, and by the way, we appreciate all the great work the Department of Education has been doing on all of the data collection. Can you share a little bit about some of your efforts in terms of collecting data and making it more transparent for students and consumers?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of data at the department, and there's a lot more we could do to help students and families make good choices about where to go to college, especially when they're taking out loans, and to recognize the colleges and universities that are accepting the challenge of serving their communities and graduating students at high rates. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we published data on partnerships between community colleges and four-year institutions. Where are the best places to enroll at a community college if your goal is a bachelor's degree? Never been any national data. By the way, New York and New Jersey are both top three, so something interesting is happening here. But we need to figure out where are those bright spots so that we can learn from what's working there. We're also working now on something that we call a financial value transparency framework. I did not name it. But the goal is to help people make informed decisions before they take out a loan. So if you want to borrow $50,000 to get that MFA, at the very least, you should understand what you're getting into.
Absolutely. Great insights on this panel. Last question for each of you. Chancellor, I'll start off with you. Lots of leaders in the education world here today. What advice would you leave for some of your fellow colleagues in the education world today?
Two things. One is stay hopeful. The data this morning were super depressing. And it's just been a hard several weeks for the world, for the country, and for our campuses. So just stay hopeful about the impact that we can have. I always find that visiting with students and some of our alumni and hearing their stories inspires me and helps build the resilience to take on the next challenge. So stay hopeful. And the second is to be entrepreneurial and creative. I think one of the biggest risks in the sector is our tendency to answer the question, why do we do that way, with the answer, because that's the way we've always done it, as opposed to trying to figure out how do we adapt so that we get more students, graduate more students, close equity gaps, and if we are willing to innovate and willing to take risks, which means doing the work to persuade our colleagues, sometimes our faculty, about those risks and those innovations, that gives us the potential, I think, to be the kind of leaders the country's asking us to be.
Great, thank you. Undersecretary, last words?
I thought the presentation was also useful for understanding the context that we're in. I think a lot of the scrutiny that we feel as higher education leaders is a backhanded compliment because people think that higher education is essential for them to feel some upward mobility and some security in this world. And that's true. I think it is hard for us to imagine solving our country's biggest challenges, from inequities to income stagnation to climate change to understanding each other across all the divisions in this country, without higher education playing a really central role. And like John, when I'm feeling frustrated or struggling, I find meeting with students to be really inspiring. Last week I was at Bunker Hill Community College in Boston. They offer courses from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m., if that tells you something about their students. I met a woman who was 5 years sober, had a 3-year-old at home, works 50, 60 hours a week, and was working toward a master's degree to help others with their addictions. I work 50 to 60 hours a week, and I have a 3-year-old at home, but I'm not going to school also. So, the fact that these students are able to persevere, I think, we talk so much about the prestige of high SAT scores and extracurriculars, but if you want to, really hold someone up, who is worthy of our admiration and respect, I think these students who are overcoming all these obstacles in order to achieve some security for themselves, for their families, to give back to their communities, I think that's what we're all about. And I think it's helpful for me certainly, to remind myself of that.
Chancellor, Undersecretary, you're both so busy. You're both so committed to the higher education world. I thank you for joining us today. I thank you for your insights. And I wish you great success in everything that you do. Please, a big round of applause for that.
Thanks so much.
Welcome. We're so happy that you are joining us. I'm thrilled to have this conversation that very nicely follows our previous panel. Let me please introduce Chancellor Mildred Garcia, who is the head of the University of California System. California State System, yes, exactly, California State, apologies. And President Berman of Yeshiva University, both joining us this morning to follow up on the great discussion that we just had. And I think although the stats were definitely depressing on a lot of things about leadership, I think the previous panel and this one will show you that although we have been rocked a little bit by leadership in higher education in the last few weeks, there are great examples of great leadership and ways to differentiate yourself and serve your communities and your campuses in really special ways. So I think that's going to be sort of how we set the table for this one. So welcome to you both. Especially Chancellor Garcia, who traveled so far and who's been on this great East Coast tour. So I just want to, before we dive into our discussion, I want to just kind of capture the unique moment a little bit, which I know for many of you in the room, it's a challenging time for leadership at colleges and universities across the country right now. for numerous reasons, including having come out of the pandemic and with so many students who were so affected by the pandemic for so many years. You and your peers are grappling with obviously this rising scrutiny from the public and policymakers, climbing costs, which we just talked a little bit about, the end of affirmative action, and of course the protests and turmoil from the conflict in the Middle East. And our last discussion explored some of this ground, but I want to hear your perspectives on some of these issues, vital to our audience, of course. Our panel is leaders leading outside the box, as you both do so well. So you obviously represent very different institutions. President Berman, a private university with 5,400 undergraduates and graduates, many of whom will go on to be important religious leaders in our country as well. And of course, Chancellor Garcia, statewide system, 23 universities have 500,000 students. And while you're each juggling unique challenges, there's some very really common ones too. And just to go beyond the numbers, and starting with you, Chancellor Garcia, can you just talk a little bit about the distinct challenges your system, your universities are facing in this moment?
Well, let me begin by saying thank you for inviting me. And yes, we're dealing with challenges, but I'm an eternal optimist because I am a first-generation college student from Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn!
And my parents worked in those factories, which are now called Dumbo, that are $3 million an apartment. So I understand this. My students, my 460,000, we're educating the new majority of America. The first generation, the low income, the students of color, and the adults. We are ensuring that everyone that walks into one of our universities has that college degree. Are they having challenges? Absolutely. Let's start out with the pandemic. The pandemic for those individuals who are underserved, who were the frontline workers, who lost family members, who lost jobs, who are going through mental health issues. You know, I speak to some of our students and you talk to them and you think about, they didn't have a prom. They didn't have a senior year. They couldn't go to their graduation from the community college to the four-year institution. They're dealing with mental, economic, and social issues that we are grappling with at our university. We're also dealing with loss of learning. Having it online was great, but we all know what young people do when they're online and no one's watching. And so there you are with the loss of learning. They're dealing with the cost of attendance. Look, we're one of the least expensive institutions in the country. But it's not tuition, because over 50% of our students leave without debt, but it is cost of attendance, the cost of transportation, the cost of getting into our institution. It's not New York City. You don't have public transportation the way you have here. And so all of that is affecting our students, and yet there's a hunger and a desire. You know, I remember as a first-generation college student, I wanted a career to get my family, my mother, my father died when I was 12, out of that factory. So these students are coming out. They want out of poverty with a fulfilling life. And they're passionate, and they're working 2 to 3 jobs. And it is our role to make sure that we surround them with those support services in order for them to finish that degree and go on to live fulfilling lives and live in a democracy.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphne. Thank you, Millie. It's such an honor to be on this panel with you. Thank you, Eric and US News for the invitation. Of course, being in the presence of my dear friend Chancellor King is always a blessing. I'll take it maybe from the opposite angle, which is the challenges of the opportunities. What we found at Yeshiva when I started about 6 years ago is that we developed a growth strategy. And over the past 6 years, we've created 20 new graduate programs, investing in areas like the allied health, mental health, science and technology, new degrees in AI, cybersecurity, physician's assistants, occupational therapy, next year nursing. And our numbers have increased greatly. In our graduate school, there used to be about 1,900 students. This year we have about 3,800 students. So we've doubled in size in those years. And how do you manage growth is a very important period. Like, we are world-class education. We need to hire quality professors. How do you identify the quality professors and pull them in, especially in the tech areas where their private sector salaries are so competitive? It's certainly been a challenge, but not just the faculty, but the space issues, the working capital. You know, how do you manage growth is a very particular poignant moment for us. And our undergraduates as well. Like, we are maxed out in our capacity. We have a longer wait list. This is before October 7th, we had a longer wait list than we've ever had. Now there's a very large group of people who are interested in coming to yeshiva, not just for our quality education, but for the safety that also that it implies. So if I could take a metaphor from the Jewish holiday that we're actually in the holiday of Hanukkah right now. And if you know the story of Hanukkah, the great miracle is that there was only a small cruise, a small little amount of oil that lasted 8 days. So we're trying to manage with a small amount. How do you manage your resources to continue to light the path and the growth, which our students, and we see students from all over the country and the world need and grow because of it.
Thanks for that. I was going to talk about this a little bit later in the discussion, but Chancellor Garcia mentioned it, and it's so crucial to so many of you in the room, which is dealing with mental health issues with students, because that has become a huge undertaking, I think, for institutions of higher learning. I was telling Chancellor Garcia's story earlier. We were both talking about sense of belonging and place and what today's students have been through. And we were with friends whose daughter was found out that she got into college on Saturday, and the mom was asking the daughter to recall some paper that she had written in 9th grade. And the daughter reminded her mother that she didn't write any paper in 9th grade because she didn't go to school for even one day in 9th grade. And she said, "Mom, I spent all of 9th grade alone in my bedroom." And I think she and her mom and her family had sort of blocked it out. But I think educators are seeing it in real time every day. If you could just talk a little bit about this generation specifically. So many of you have educated lots of generations, but if you could talk about just sort of what you're seeing today that is different and how you've had to pivot to respond.
You know, I think I mentioned before is what they went through during COVID, which is something that they're young, they're seeing a world that they're not used to. And so our universities are working really, really hard. One of the things that all our universities have to do is understand the students you serve. What neighborhoods, what language do they speak? How do they learn? Are they the first in their family? Understand and learn your students so that then we can provide the support services. We look at learning as a holistic learning, looking holistically of what our students need. That's why we have food pantries on our campus. That's why we have mental health issues, mental health professionals on our campus. That's why we have dress banks where people donate clothes and we make sure. So when they go out on those interviews, they're not worried that they're not dressed appropriately because they can't afford it. Those are the kinds of things that our campuses have to do. In addition to that, we're making sure that we're partnering with our communities of mental health, making sure that we are referring, bringing them on campus, having workshops. And another thing we do is have affinity groups of all kinds. You name the group, we have affinity groups. Because we all know that we tend to come to where we are just to get that big hug, and then you go out into the world to deal with all the challenges that confront you. So it's looking at it holistically, working with your partners, and understanding that our universities are stewards of place. We are part of the community. We are part of all of our communities, regardless of their background.
Yeah, this is a huge issue. We have seen a tremendous, sadly, a growth in people's needs and our students' needs in the mental health space. We have increased our services and our health and wellness center and our counseling center. But we really see it as the students take it on themselves. The largest event in our undergraduate program, student run, is called Stop the Stigma, where students stand up on stage and talk about their experiences going through mental health challenges. And the support and love that's in that room. I always make sure, wherever I am in the world, I always make sure to be back at Yeshiva University for that event. I want them to see the president there, that I am with them. And the whole idea of we standing together is so essential, and to stop the stigma so people can feel who they are, own who they are, and progress. I'll tell you that for our specific campus in the undergraduate school, especially since October 7th, okay, every single student, literally, of our, we have over 2,000 students on our campuses in New York. We have another 800 in Israel right now. Every single student either knows or is one degree of separation from someone who was killed, raped, taken as a hostage, or killed in the line of duty. So the student body is suffering. And that's been one of our, we've had major increase in costs. One of the areas that we invest in heavily is mental health of our students. And I'd say on the other side of it, which is also important, is to educate and ensure that we have the researchers and the professionals. We have 2 graduate schools, one in Graduate School of Psychology, Furkhoff School of Psychology, which is top-tier research and top-notch. That they're in the field working in these areas, breaking new ground on the methods in mental health and all the pieces. And we have a Wurzweiler School of Social Work, which goes out into the community. Care Cafe, whenever there's a crisis, they're out in their communities, and to develop the professionals, and the researchers and the educators of the future, knowing how important mental health is today. Like, it is essential on both of those ends, to take care of the students and to develop the thought leaders and educators for our future.
How do you spot students who are maybe at the front end of a crisis, and helping them sort of manage that and stay in school and get the help they need?
It's our faculty, it's our advisors, it's our students who are your front end. It's not the president.
Right.
It is those who are at the front line with the students, and that's why it's so important that our advisors have great professional development, that our faculty members have great professional development, that our students, through their clubs and their affinity groups, have great professional development and know where the resources are at each and every one of our campuses. So that our job as presidents and chancellors are to make sure those resources are out there in order to spot those students and immediately bring them to the resources they need.
Yeah, to add to what Millie said, it's so important, the student-teacher ratio, the individual attention, meaning every single student who comes to Yeshiva University is loved. Every single student who comes to Yeshiva University has not just academic support, has professional support, actually also spiritual support and mental health support. There's an envelope that surrounds them, and they know that we're invested in them. The only thing I'd add is that in our, institution, even the president does play a role in it, because I get calls from parents and sometimes like to help over-tally their kids. I'm like, I'm the president of the university. We don't do that. We don't do that. But whenever I'm individually engaged, when I'm walking on campus or even in my office, it's very important for me to show them that I am there and present, and we will always direct them and guide them to the right resources. It has to be 360. Like the entire student experience is one of where they know that there are people who care about them now and into their future.
So one of the stats that we looked at, and that Eric mentioned too in the previous panel, was just about leadership, that kind of crisis of faith in leadership, and it obviously transcends universities, but we're in a moment in leadership in higher education right now, and Eric referenced the hearings last week and the kind of fallout from it. Are we at an inflection point? Is this a new moment of kind of scrutiny or stress testing of our institutions? Maybe Chancellor Garcia, you have so many presidents who report to you, you probably have the best insight.
So let me begin by saying that before I became chancellor, I was the president of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, where we had professional development programs for new presidents and those wannabe presidents. And one of the things that we hear from them and those that are in the office now, it's different. There's so many things going on that when I became president, way back when, was very different. Social media is immediate. Threats against presidents' lives and their families is happening, which is unfortunate. The challenge of making sure that you keep all students safe, regardless of background, is on your shoulder 24/7. The loss of civility and how we must make sure that we teach students how to have civil debate and dialogue.
Hear, hear.
And move away and still say, hey, I'm sorry, I disagree. I was just telling Daphne right before, I always think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, opposites, opposed, and yet the best of friends. We must teach our students to uphold a democracy in a way that's really fractured. And so that's the role. We are a university laboratory where students can come and experiment and learn, but they also have to learn how to live in a civil democracy. And I think that's the difference a president has.
I'm going to, for the brevity of time, I'm not going to mince words. I think we've experienced a failure of leadership in a major, very public way when it comes to university presidents during this time. And what we've been missing is moral clarity, which cuts to the core of what the position of a president is. Is a president a steward of his institution, of his or her institution, or are they a leader? Are they there as an administrator and to raise money, or are they there to have an educational vision and move forward moral leadership and bring their university with them? I will tell you that I have spoken to dozens of college presidents over these past couple of months because I started a national coalition of university presidents against terrorism. Something which one would think is a very obvious point, which is that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and we try to make it very clear that we should educate our students that they should and can be pro-Palestinian and also be anti-Hamas, that the Palestinians too are suffering under Hamas. And we have a statement about standing with Israel, with the Palestinian people who suffer under Hamas's cruel rule, and all people of moral conscience. I'm happy to say we had over 100 college presidents across the country signing it from major public and private universities, including the chancellor of SUNY, including the chancellor of CUNY, including Arizona State and University of Miami and Baylor, University of Texas. We've had faith-based universities of all denominations, Notre Dame, Catholic universities, HBCUs, the president of the United Negro College Fund, Dillard. We brought the country together on a very basic moral point, that universities are united against terrorism. And through that effort, I spoke to dozens of college universities around the country, and I actually now have my finger on the pulse of their experiences and what they are going through. And I will tell you that college presidents feel alone. They're alone. They are on an island. And if you think about what college presidents, the average tenure of a college president, which I think is less than 5 years. So that means,
But who's counting?
ACE.
but what that means is that most of these college presidents they deal with are in their first 1 or 2 years. They don't have the leadership experience, and it's playing out on the national stage. It was abhorrent what happened, the testimony last week. Genocide against the Jews is something you can say in your college campus. Where's the moral outrage? Where's the moral leadership?
Well, I wanted to actually add something from the poll, which we got last night, which I think is very telling. 63% of Americans and 59% of Gen Z and millennials told us in the Harris poll that they didn't think university leaders were handling anti-Semitism on campuses effectively. Kind of goes hand in hand with sort of the crisis of leadership generally that they're feeling. Although your comments about signing on to the letter together, I think if they were a little bit more aware of that, that could have an impact.
I haven't heard about it yet, so I'll sign it.
Okay, there you go.
You didn't,
I'm here
we're
just
only
to
divided.
recruit. No, but that, look, it's part of what you just said, Daphne, is very important. I'm one person.
Right.
And we went with my peers and we tried to spread it. But national organizations didn't take it on themselves. I won't mention names. If a national organization took it on themselves, everyone would know about it. But we had to do it as individuals to band together. And that's what I mean. The college presidents feel alone. It wasn't an effort that was part of them. So they all had to decide themselves. You know, most of them said to me, they were just happy to have a conversation with me, whether they signed or not. The fact that there was a college president that was reaching out to them to talk to them about an issue which is the most divisive issue in recent American history. College presidents have told me that they've never seen this on their college campuses before, more than Me Too, more than George Floyd, because this is the first time that students were against each other. In all the other situations, all the students rallied on the same side. This was dividing their college, and they had no utensils, they had no vehicles, and how to handle it. They still don't. You know, that's a big, you know, when you talk about the question of the purpose of a college president and what is the support system that they have, I think this whole situation revealed a lot also of what we need to be doing.
Chancellor, do you want to add?
You know, I think I absolutely agree with him. I do think that that's why some of our organizations do have, or presidents that get together. Ask you, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities do have a very strong network of presidents, because presidents do feel alone. Throughout this and many, many other things, you know, when you have a president call you and say, I found my son sitting in the dark because there's been a threat against my family, they thought they were coming to get him. Some people start to think, why am I doing this? You could threaten me, but don't threaten my family. Those are the things that are happening to our college presidents. So when they say, is it tough? It's tough. And yes, I think James Cavall said very clearly, we're not experts in everything. So we have to make sure that we get college presidents we can trust across the country in order to make sure that we collectively learn together.
Yeah, and I do think the Department of Education has been doing on this issue admirably, but I do think they could be doing more. We are adrift. Students don't know their rights. Students don't know from the federal law. This is a conversation that we've had a lot. The Clery Act requires colleges to report every single year the crimes that happen on or near their campuses. Students are victims of hate crimes all over this country, because one of the hate crimes is intimidation. Calling for genocide for the Jews, if a Jewish student feels physically threatened by that, that's a hate crime of intimidation. They don't know that they should go to their campus police and report it, and it'll show up on the university's numbers. We can't combat this unless we could measure it and see it. But that is a responsibility of the Department of Education to share that, the facts, or the universities to share the facts. You know, it's not just about their code of conduct, it's federal law. And there's a whole dearth of information. And the people in charge really need to work on disseminating this to save and help this country.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, about students feeling harassed, and students of color, women who feel harassed on campus all the time.
LGBTQ.
Right, LGBTQ, and don't know how to report or in what direction. So I think it's something that would help all students.
You're totally right, by the
Yes.
way. And the Clery Act, which is public documents, if you look at what happens to women on these college campuses, I mean, we're talking about ranking colleges. This is public information. When you send your daughter to a school, the percentage risk of something happening, look at these Ivy League schools. What is considered elite in this country? You know, one of the reasons we put together this national coalition is to show actually there are elite leaders in this country. We just have to identify who they really are. You know, and that's
And define elite.
exactly.
And to finally, I wanted to just ask you also, and it came up a little bit, and Chancellor King talked about this as well. Just how are you, considering everything we have just talked about, the atmosphere on campus, the challenges, students coming out of the pandemic, how are you preparing them for graduation and the workforce, just generally this generation? And I just want to remind everyone of the data we saw on Gen Z and how they are looking at the world and looking at their challenges and opportunities. You know them best.
So what we do is we make sure we have all sorts of partnerships. You see, the students want to see the end game. They want to see what's going to happen to me once I graduate. And so we're starting very early. Many of our universities are starting with high school, community college, and the CSU really doing dual enrollment, starting very early in high school. We are also looking at things like brotherhood success. We know that young men are not going to college. And when we get them from high school and community college, we want to hold on to them. Yeah. And so we have special support services for our young men to make sure that this is a crisis that no one's talking about who's going to college. And it's young men and people of color in general that are not going. So that. We also have partnerships with business and industry. You know, Cal State, Fresno, and San Bernardino works with the agriculture business and the agriculture industry and our campus to make sure that they're seeing positions. Or we have something like this one you'll love, Sonoma has a wine enthusiasm center laboratory where they teach students about the wine industry and what they have to go through. So it's the connection with business, with government, with industry. So students can see themselves, try it, see if they like it, so they don't go the whole 4 years or can go into a master's program and get paid internships. Because our students have to have paid internships because they have to work to either support their families, their children, whatever it is, they need to work. And most of our students are working 2 to 3 jobs, and that's their reality. And that's why our support services have to change. So we do all sorts of things to make sure we're keeping them see the end game. What's the eye on the prize?
We care for our students. It's almost like from cradle to grave. They are when they come in, immediately they walk right into our career center that has first year options for our students. We have a student success center to make sure to help people who are struggling with retention, struggling in their classes. We have a very strong alumni network, alumni and friends network. We mentor our successful alumni with the individual students and the areas of their interest. Our students, after 6 months in undergraduate, 6 months after they graduate, there's a 97.6% that they are in their destination of their choosing, whether that is a position or in graduate school. Meaning, so we focus a lot on the people that come in are very much part of our Yeshiva University family, both in our undergraduate and in our graduate schools. You know, we have top law school, Cardozo Law School, top research in psychology, science and health school. all of our students are part of our family. And they feel that, and we show them that while they're students, but also long after they're students, so that they're part of a network that cares for them forever.
That's great. Just before we wrap, because we were talking so much about leadership, I sort of want to throw out the same question that the Undersecretary and Chancellor King spoke about, which is, just from your experience now, what would you want to share with other leaders in the room in this moment, but also what they should be thinking about sort of for the next couple of years in the job if they make it to the 5.9? Chancellor Garcia.
What was said before is so true. Yeah, honesty, transparency, authenticity. The truth of the matter is we don't tell students who we are. And it's one of my best friends told me, you are now a role model, like it or not. And that's the truth. And so it's important for students to hear that I'm the first Latina ever to run a system in this country.
Amazing.
But it's not about me. It's about the Latinas and young women of color following me. It's them understanding they see me dressing nicely, have a nice car. I was in the housing projects, the Farragut Fort Greene projects in Brooklyn. Once my father died, we had to go to the housing projects. They need to know who we are as people and be authentic about that. They need to know that for me, the reason I'm doing this, my North Star is public higher ed in Brooklyn, PSA and Rothschild Junior High School gave me the foundation I am here today. And what has happened in my life is because of education. My family always said, my mother and father always told us, the only inheritance a poor family could leave you is a good education. La única herencia una familia pobre le deja a sus hijos es una buena educación. And for those Latinos that are here, they're shaking their head. They say it all the time. And so we have to do all of that, trust, honesty, ethical, but authentic, and clarity of what you're doing this job for. I'm doing it for the students. When I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about what will be best for them.
Nice. Final thought from you.
Yeah, I just want to say that my wife's grandmother, when she escaped from the Holocaust, moved to Cuba. So my wife's parents are from Cuba, and I'm also inspired by the Latino story. And thank you for your incredible work, Millie. I will, let me share one story that I think captures a lot for me. When I started as, and this is off the record, we said? Is this officially? No. When I started as a new president, I went to Harvard. There was a summer seminar for new presidents. And I remember in between sessions, the presidents were talking about issues that really concern them. These are brand new presidents. And the issue that came up was, how extreme does the faculty's language have to be before you intervene to stop them? And there were like some incredibly crazy examples. And they concluded that, if they're calling for active violence, that's when you need to step in. And I said to them, I said, you're all talking about negative freedom, about what are the boundaries in which you can stop speech? What about positive freedom? Why are you here? What is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve with your university? And I was so struck because they were struck. They're like, wow, that's a great question. And all throughout the conference, people were like, do you remember when Ari asked, why are we here? And we've gotten a little lost. Freedom of expression is a vehicle. For most universities, the goal is to seek truth. That's one way of finding truth. Okay, but let's remember what the goals are. And I think presidents, what they need to do is articulate their values that underpin their missions, and that their whole strategy needs to emerge from their core values. That's what we do at Yeshiva University. We have 5 core values. They run our entire operations through our school, through the undergraduate school, which is very much a studying Torah with the academy and combining it. You have great Jewish professionals who go into all fields in medicine and business and teaching and psychology, all fields. To our graduate schools, with Jews and non-Jews, thousands of students who are there for a top-tier education, but they're infused with core human values. And they understand that we're investing in them to become the leaders of tomorrow. And what does that mean? It's not just to get a great job. It's not just live a life of success. It's live a life of meaning and purpose, of service and contribution. And just to end, if you ask me about Generation Z, what I see with them, I am so impressed because they're seeking meaning. It's not enough. The answers, the ephemeral answers that are being given by society today are not sufficient for them. They want something more in their lives. And that's the opportunity to inspire them, to think greater than themselves. And of course, getting the right job and the right profession is part of that. But what do you do in that profession? How are you impacting the lives of others and bringing redemption to everyone you encounter, from the cubicle to the boardroom? And that's the spirit, I think, that needs to animate higher education. And that's what I'd suggest to leaders, is they should think of themselves, why were they there in the first place, and make that happen.
Thank you. Please help me thank these incredible leaders.
Thank you so much.
And I want to welcome my colleague, Brian Kelly, to the stage, who is going to close out our morning.
Thank you. Thanks, Daphne. This has been a packed morning, I have to say, and we're close to running a little over time, and I appreciate your indulgence. Jonathan Capel, president of Montclair State University, we are not going to get the longest word, but we are going to get the last word. And I will often take that as the better alternative. We have a lot of things that we want to touch on here. I'm Brian Kelly. I'm not Eric Gertler, it says on your program. I used to be Eric Gertler, but not anymore. But I'm pleased to be here with Jonathan. I grew up in Clifton, New Jersey. First university I ever saw was Montclair State. It was big, and it's always stuck in my heart, so I'm delighted to be able to be here with Jonathan. Among other things, Montclair State has recently been named one of our highest ranked schools for social mobility. There's a lot of other things we can talk about. Jonathan's biography is terrific. He was at Arizona State University, very innovative, doing innovative things at Montclair State. But let's kind of get to the quick lightning round here, which I really want to. We talked a little bit earlier, but what did we hear today, Jonathan? What are we taking away from a lot of information?
Yeah, so, and I think we can use this as an opportunity to try and synthesize, in addition to talking about some of the stuff we want to talk about. And I should say, just so I have credibility, I went to PS 81 and 141 in the Bronx. So I fit in with the panel today. So the main thing I take away is that the story of higher education that's reported in the New York Times, which makes it seem like the world is Harvard and the Ivy League, is just completely wrong. I'm not talking about the hearings and the general craziness of the last week. I'm just saying that idea that the Ivy League is representative of higher education in America, both the good and the challenges, is just wrong. And the way that Chancellors King and Garcia talked about their mission and what they're doing, I can tell you that, and it reflects on those poll numbers. Chancellors King and Garcia are thinking about a lot of things: the size of the endowment that they have to manage, and whether or not the movement of the S&P 500 affected. That's not one of them. And so I think what we need to take from this session is to reorient the conversation around higher education away from the dynamics of a few small institutions. And by the way, I'm not even just talking about the degree to which those institutions are creating pathways for students who are marginalized from higher education. Even some of the logistical things. So you heard President Berman talking about the challenge of growth. Those institutions aren't talking about the challenge of growth because their business model is to stay the same and to exclude people and not to grow. So an institution like Montclair State University, or we were talking about Arizona State University, or the SUNY system or the CSU system, we're trying to grow to create more learning opportunities for more students. That's our mission. An institution that's not trying to grow doesn't have to grapple with some of the same things. So if we want to have a conversation about the future of higher education and the challenges, we need to stop the fixation with a small number of elite institutions.
Should we just get rid of the Ivy League?
No, no, not at all. They serve a purpose. I'm a graduate. Like, they serve a purpose. They offer a pathway for a small number of people to a remarkable education. But fundamentally, and I think this part of the conversation about affirmative action was lost, fundamentally, a marginal change in the composition of the student body of a tiny number of institutions that serves a tiny percentage of students is not going to alter the landscape of leadership in the country. So if the survey data says people look at the leaders of businesses and government and they say, we want to see more diversity, what the Ivy League does to change the percent composition of their enrollment is not going to affect that. It's just not going to affect that. There was a study that I'm sure many of the people here know. Raj Chetty, who's a well-known economist, wrote an article talking about how because the leadership of institutions is so dominated by people from the Ivy League, and I think it was 3 other private institutions, the leadership of those institutions won't become more diverse unless the Ivy League institutions are more diverse and so on. That was I almost laughed out loud when I read this, because it didn't even occur to them that maybe the problem is that the leadership of those institutions is dominated by the graduates of 10 colleges. Like, that's the problem. It turns out there are a lot of really smart, really talented people who didn't go to those schools. And so maybe we need to figure out how to diversify the pipeline so that we're not leaving, acres and acres of human potential left uncultivated.
Yeah. So I think folks here probably are aware, U.S. News rankings, we do rank 1,500 schools. We've always said it's not just about the Ivy League, but obviously there's a tremendous focus in the Ivy League. But then we've had some really good conversations about data here. And we have expanded our capacity to look more deeply at institutions and want to do more of it. What would you, at Montclair State, what would you like to be ranked on? What data would you like to surface that would allow you to showcase more of what you're doing and show consumers and students what it is that they could get from Montclair?
Well, I really appreciated what U.S. News was trying to do in revising the way you were doing the rankings, because I think what you shifted the focus to, and this is what we at Montclair State University would be particularly interested in having people look at, is what's the delta for the student who attends the university, right? So if the main value out of a university is that I filter out 97% of the people that I add, the question of what the gain is for the student who attended that university is fairly hard to answer. Because I could tell you that student, the marginal effect on that student's life of going to institution ranked number 1 versus institution ranked number 2, the marginal effect is close to 0. But the marginal effect on a student's life of going to Montclair State University is enormous. So it turns out that if I wanted to predict whether a student graduates from college, the most useful thing to know is not their high school GPA, it's actually their family income. And the demographics of the student population gives you a predicted graduation rate. Montclair State University's predicted graduation rate is 20 percentage points lower than our actual graduation rate. And so that's what puts us number 7 for social mobility in the U.S. News ranking on that score. I want people to know what difference it's going to make in their life to go to our institution. That's not exclusive, but I want to be clear, it's not exclusive to Montclair State University. We take great pride in that. But that's, I think, the question that people should be asking when they're looking at colleges. How is this experience going to alter my trajectory, right? That should be the substantive judgment of the value of a college education. And yes, it matters whether you have letters after your name and what the income implications of that, and we can get into all that. Yeah. But I don't think that question is asked. I don't think that question is asked enough. I was talking to another university leader who said, quite honestly, their institution, it's a selective private institution, not Ivy League, but they said, a kid who goes to my school is going to be fine whether they go to my school or not. Like, they're going to be fine. I don't think that's necessarily true for a student who attends Montclair State University. Not every student, many students. And it's certainly not true for every student who attends a CUNY or SUNY institution or a Cal State institution. We take a great deal of pride in that, and we've built our institution to ensure, to the extent possible, that we're capable of having that effect on a student's life.
Right. What are some of the specific, I mean, that doesn't happen by itself, as we know.
No.
The schools that don't do well on our list, we look at and say, they're taking kids in and they're not fulfilling the mission. What are some specific things that you're doing to get these kids to that level?
Well, and Chancellor Garcia alluded to it, so I don't want to repeat the things previous things. So part of it is providing the mentorship and the wraparound services, the being cognizant of the needs of a student. Chancellor King mentioned the idea of giving hands-on learning opportunities to prepare people for the workforce. We're trying to get more intentional about preparing a student not only for success in college, but beyond. A few years ago, somebody made the really good point to me. They said, you talk all the time about first-generation college students, but those are first-generation professionals. So they don't know anything about schmoozing at a cocktail party or preparing for an interview or dressing the right way for a professional interaction. So to the extent you can build that into the process, I think it's more useful to the student. A second thing, just to put specificity, there's been a lot of discussion about data, and I will mention that in any gathering of higher ed leaders, one of the main topics, which actually it's interesting to me, the phrase hasn't even been said until I'm about to say it, the main topics is artificial intelligence. And what does that mean for the future of higher education? What does that mean for the future of work? And one of the opportunities is to deploy artificial intelligence to better understand our students. So data in and of itself doesn't do anything. The question is, how do you use that data? So our hope is to build a 360-degree picture of a student. Yes, how they're doing in classes, but are they getting their meals regularly? Are they exercising? How much time are they spending on their homework? The way we're tracked these days, we can have a remarkably thorough picture of a human being while they're in college. And what if we then deploy artificial intelligence to predict when a student might be on a pathway to bad outcomes and intervene sooner? Right. That's what universities need to be doing. And I will say, universities that have a population like ours or SUNY or Cal State, we're thinking that way. We're thinking, how do we increase the outcomes? Because that's how we ultimately deal with the dissatisfaction people feel towards higher education, by increasing the success rate, as Undersecretary Caval talked about.
It's interesting. I majored in schmoozing at cocktail parties in college, so it's a different experience. It was valuable.
I was gonna say, look where it got you.
Yeah, it's not everyone goes that path. But one of the things that I know you've talked about and Montclair State has done is engaging in the community, specifically hands-on in the community, and then simultaneously, I mean, related to that is the broader sort of sense of public service and sort of imbuing that in the curriculum. Talk a little bit about, does that have an effect, particularly maybe on disadvantaged students? Is that an appeal?
I think that's fundamental to who we are, and I think it's important on a lot of levels. And let's get back to the beginning of the dissatisfaction people feel with higher education. Yeah. I think some of these are people's sort of diffuse frustration that takes the form of kind of answers about endowment. So here's how I would translate that endowment answer, which is universities seem to care only about themselves, right? And as long as the university is doing well, the university is satisfied. And they have beautiful campuses, sometimes surrounded by communities that are not so beautiful. So at Montclair, we don't view that as an acceptable attitude. So the success of the institution is defined in part by the success of the communities that we're serving. And so we are deeply engaged in Newark. Since I've arrived, we've become super involved in Patterson, which as a Clifton guy, is a nearby community. I'm a big Patterson booster, really interesting, underappreciated city in New Jersey, key to our country's history, in fact, the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, but tough. Economically stressed, high levels of crime, unemployment, lack of opportunity. How do we as a university sit next to Patterson, New Jersey and say, well, it's not my problem? I mean, to me, that's unacceptable. And so we're engaged there in multiple interesting ways. We're part of the resurrection of Hinchliffe Stadium, one of the only standing Negro League facilities. We've taken responsibility for creating a museum of the stadium, and we're going to create a curriculum with the Patterson School District. We're turning Eastside High School, which people might know from the Morgan Freeman movie about Joe Clark, and we are making that a community school to create a full-service center. In each of these things, we create learning opportunities for students. So this is the key to answering your question. So the students now are applying the lessons that they're learning in the classroom to advance the communities, many of which they come from. They're from Patterson, and that has a lot of value. First of all, it underscores their civic responsibility, but it also gives them the opportunity to apply the knowledge that they're acquiring in the classroom, and it gives them a sense of efficacy. If there's one thing that I strongly agree with about the characterization of Gen Z, they want to do stuff now. They're impatient to take action now. And the idea that you're going to tell them, well, study this for 5 or 10 years and then someday you'll get to apply it, like, unacceptable. They're just not interested. I talk to students like they're starting businesses. I'm not talking about side hustles, like consulting firms with clients across the country. They're doing it now. And so if we're going to reach students and show them that what we're doing matters, we have to create those opportunities. Yeah. And so by our meeting our responsibility to create pipelines for teachers, to address social inequity, to deal with hunger and homelessness, we are also serving our students by giving them what they demand from an education in the 21st century.
How are your students doing?
I think my students are in a lot of the same places that the previous speakers talked about. I think that they're reacting to the world. They're reacting to the world around them, and they are distressed. I think everything that was said before, COVID consequences. I think one of the things that wasn't alluded to directly, but we're seeing, and it's related to the reaction to Israel, Gaza. One of the consequences of students being cloistered for a year and a half, 2 years, is they didn't develop the conflict resolution skills that are so critical. And so we're actually seeing, this sounds funny, but we're actually seeing more irresolvable fights between roommates. And people, the roommate, doesn't behave the way they want. And you're like, I want a new roommate. And it's like, no, work it out. And they're like, no, I demand to be moved. And it's like, well, there's nowhere to move you to. But those skills of like, how do you deal with disagreement? Yes, it deals with international affairs, but it deals with interpersonal relations as well. The one pushback, and I guess it didn't get captured in the poll, or maybe I just am lucky to be with students who don't conform to that, but it's true in my ASU experience as well as Montclair. I actually think that there's a higher level of optimism among younger students than in my brain, but also than among my peers, and that the students are not deterred by the world. They say, I do think that they're like, all right, get out of the way, because you're not making things better, and we'll deal with it. But they're not throwing up their hands and saying, oh, we're doomed, and what's the point? They're saying, I need to get at it, and I need to get skills. The thing that I'm most impressed with by students at Montclair is they're like sponges. They're like, they are so appreciative of the resources that are available to them. I think more so than at institutions that frankly have more resources, if I can be so bold. I don't have everything to offer that the Ivy League institutions do, but my students are so eager to use everything that's available to them to make themselves better and to prepare to be change agents. I'm inspired by it. I would be much more depressed if I didn't get to hang around with Montclair students.
That's
the truth.
That's because they're from Jersey. They figure it out.
That's part of it.
People from Jersey get that. People who aren't from Jersey don't even know what I'm talking about, so don't worry. Dig a little deeper on this whole speech issue. How are you dealing with that? Is there a speech code? Is there something? How are you trying to draw the line?
Yeah, and every institution's different. And by the way, I could go on at some length on I'll call it the clumsiness of some of the institutions and the leaders and how they've handled this. There are many more institutions that are handling it quite well, by the way. We don't talk about them because that's not a very good story, and they didn't get invited to testify. Gee, I wonder why. So Montclair is interesting. So President Berman and I had a really interesting discussion about this. Turns out Montclair State University probably has one of the largest if not the largest populations of Palestinian students of any school in the country. Probably maybe a little different Clifton than the Clifton you grew up in. Clifton and Patterson has the second largest Palestinian community in the United States after Chicago. A lot of those students come to Montclair. So we have a very large Palestinian student population that's been very active and expressing themselves. And we have a Jewish population that's very concerned about what's going on in the world. I think that the key, and I'll tie it to the theme of the session, the key is that way I've thought about my role in this as a leader is to not talk about foreign policy. Montclair State University doesn't have a foreign policy, it turns out. But I'm the leader of a community. And my job is to maintain that community as a place where everybody feels safe, heard, and respected. And so in the messaging that I've done, it's been trying to underscore what the values of our community are and what the expectations we have for each other in terms of how we interact. And it's more about that than a discussion of the overall situation. I have a lot I could say about that, and I've watched people commenting, as again the previous speakers made references, hard to comprehend things that are being said, and it's frustrating for me as somebody who cares about public affairs to not jump in and say, but that's just a fundamental misreading of history. But that's not the goal, right? From my current position, and maybe there'll be a time when we get to that, but my current position is to try and establish an expectation of what discourse should look like. And by the way, that should make it obvious that calling for the extermination of one set of students is not an acceptable form of discourse. But I think the key is, and actually this gets to what are we for, The key is establishing the values of the community and what we want to be as a university community. And I think that's been missing, right? There's been no affirmative statement. It's all negative. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. But not what do we aspire to be. And I think part of being a leader is laying out that aspiration, and that has not been forthcoming from many people.
As a scholar and a professor, you have studied institutional behavior, right? And now you're in an institution and trying to figure out how it behaves. One of the arguments is that university presidents actually have a surprisingly little amount of power, that I've heard. Has that been your experience? And how do you move the needle when you've got these, as everyone has talked about today, these incredibly complex issues, vast constituency?
No, I don't. Look, it depends on what your expectations are. I mean, these are not dictatorships, right? So you can't just by fiat change things. But I think if you can lay out a vision as to what you're trying to accomplish, you can do things. Probably the biggest, I think, shortcoming of higher education in response to those poll results is that many people see leadership as being a cheerleader or a booster in response. So what most university presidents, I think, tend to do, by the way, not our speakers, but what most university presidents say, no, these people who are critical of higher education, they got it wrong. We're fabulous. We're terrific. Everything's great. Or they'll say, yeah, but not my institution. And so I actually think what we ought to be doing is owning it and saying, like, yeah, there's a reason why people are frustrated with higher education. The majority of people who went to college in this country don't have a degree. I mean, just think about that for a second. The majority of expenditures under the Pell program, people are familiar with that, the majority of expenditures under the Pell program did not result in a degree. So, like, anybody want to defend that? I don't know. I mean, so the question is, how are we going to change to address that? And more often the emphasis is on how does the student adapt to the university. Enough with that. How do we adapt to make ourselves better able to accommodate students? And so when you lay it out that way, then I think people are willing to change. I'm not saying that it's easy. I don't snap my fingers. Several members of my team here, and they're like, oh yeah, it's totally easy. But we've actually been able to do some interesting things. And one of the things that we've been able to do is integrate Bloomfield College. Bloomfield College is the only predominantly black institution in New Jersey. We don't have any HBCUs in New Jersey. It was on the verge of collapsing basically because the business model was unsustainable. And that seemed simply wrong, inconsistent with our mission to let the only institution dedicated to serving African Americans in New Jersey to let that fail. So we said, well, could we design a structure where that became part of Montclair, but retained its distinctive mission, right? That has a differentiated pathway within a large public university. And you would say, well, how on earth would a public university do that? And the answer is because we had a purpose. I'm looking at my board chair, so I'm happy to say that the Board of Trustees said, yeah, we should do that. That's the right thing to do, and that's going to require some adaptation, but it's for a reason. It's not change for change's sake. And so I think universities are willing to change. You're familiar with ASU. ASU is known nationally for sort of saying, let's blow it up a little bit and see how we can do things differently. I think people are okay with that if there's a substantive goal in mind.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Given everything I've heard today, why did you take this job?
So it turns out that my joke is that I'm an average of my parents. My mother was a college professor and administrator, and my father, who's sitting over there, was a lifelong public servant. 20 plus years in the state legislature and New York State Attorney General, and so I became a political science professor because I just merged politics and academia. But the longer answer is because I think universities are capable of being incredibly powerful instruments of social transformation. And quite frankly, they're underutilized to that end. And I saw that. I'm a super geek. I took a class in college on higher education leadership. So presidents like to say, I never thought I'd be a university president. Like, no, I had this in mind like a long time ago. Because yes, it's frustrating to deal with some of this stuff, but there's an opportunity. Think about what we're empowered to do. First of all, to create pathways for individuals to change their lives. But I actually think, and I'll throw this out there as a closing thought, I actually think part of the reason that we've lost track of the value of higher education is because we're nerd alert. We've lost track of it because we only talk about it as a private good, right? So that as if we're churning out educations, people get a college degree and it's economically valuable to them, and thus the ROI on higher education is how much did your salary go up because you got a bachelor's degree from Acme University. Higher education and education generally, we shouldn't forget, should be thought of as a public good. Society is better because more people are educated. Even people who don't have a college degree benefit from the prosperity of having a highly educated society. The explosion of the American economy in the 1950s was driven in part by the GI Bill, which broadened access to college education and created a dramatically educated workforce. Indeed, in New Jersey, one of the problems we have is we don't have enough educated workers to fill the jobs that are available. At the same time, we have a remarkably high unemployment rate. Just wrap your brain around that for a second. And so we need to embrace the idea that higher education, when properly oriented and performing at a high level, is one of the greatest drivers we've ever invented as a species to drive social prosperity. And so I think the assignment to say, okay, make that work in the 21st century with a different level of public investment and a different set of expectations and a different set of complexity, that's a pretty good assignment. I'll take it.
Okay, good job.
Thank you.
Capel, thank you.
Again, thank you, Dr. Capel. Thank you for being our sponsor, and thank you for this conversation. As you were talking, your father was smiling. So I think you got the signature seal of approval. To all of our guests, thank you for coming out this morning. Thank you for sharing with us, and I think what you heard today just will inspire you as we go forward, all of you in the academia, to do better and do greater for young people. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.